Hello, everyone, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host, and Daniel, good to see you.
How are you this morning, Dr. Paul?
Doing well. I'm still trying to digest this State of the Union. I want to find out if the State of the Union is as great as it was panned to be.
Better than ever.
Why do we worry about the State of the Union when it's so great?
I know.
But there is still a lot of great stuff, and I think we're in the preservation business of trying to preserve what had been and still is great. But we have a lot of problems, and it takes a lot of gall to have a speech like that when we think about deficits. Where are we with our empire?
Yeah.
Who's running it? The Neocons, and is the military industrial complex still in charge? And all of us, you think, well, things aren't quite that rosy, and yet, you know, impeaching and throwing the president out of office hardly was the answer, you know, to the problems. You know, one of the things they were charging Trump with was, you know, obstructing Congress. Well, that might be a great idea.
Yeah.
You know, as if, you know, does that mean that if you can't obstruct Congress, you'd have to get rid of the veto, wouldn't you? You could never veto. You have to sign everything.
That's true.
I mean, the whole thing was so preposterous that, anyway, we want to talk today about the foreign policy. He talked not a whole lot about the foreign policy. Most of it was statistics that were directed towards showing that we were in great shape, which we challenged to a large degree, mainly because of the deficit overriding and the extent our empire is out there around the world. And and one thing is, I don't happen to believe everybody loves us. You know, I think, matter of fact, that's one of the things that's happening. I think we're losing the prestige. The more we fight for our empire, the more credibility we lose and the more resistance we have. So that is what we're facing. But he did mention a lot of foreign policy things, not in depth. But the one issue that caught my attention the most, even though there were a lot of them, it had to do with Venezuela. Mm-hmm. Because, of course, it's been recently in the news. And, of course, the policy we have, I consider atrocious. I think the socialists in charge of Venezuela are a detriment to the Venezuelans. I think it's miserable. I think something should be done. I think the Venezuelans should do it.
Yeah.
But all of a sudden, you know, we decide that Maduro's a really bad guy. He has to go, which is, if people say that, that's fine. But where did we get this authority to all of a sudden pick the next president?
Yeah.
Guaido. And you know, and people love it, you know. Well, they're bad people in running that government. We need to make them modern, make them Democrats and you know, free market people. But honestly, to pick the guy and say, here he is, and introduce him as the real president of Venezuela. Now, a lot of people, maybe the large majority of the people in this country might say, well, that sounds like a pretty good idea. But when you think it through, it's a bit of arrogance that is just going to stir up more trouble. And so far, everything the CIA has done and our government has done in Venezuela hasn't really accomplished very much.
No, it's cost a couple bucks, though, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. All of the foreign policy things from the president's speech that we're going to point out today as being terrible, horrific, the Democrats will think are wonderful. So this is they
right.
will disagree with us. Both Republicans and Democrats, for the most part, will disagree with everything we say here because they both love the foreign policy of empire. But you're right; it was a comical moment when the hapless Juan Guaido stood up, you know, and was recognized by Trump, who's reputed to hate losers, and this is a guy who's a total loser. But here's what President Trump said. The U.S. is leading a 59-nation diplomatic coalition against the socialist dictator Maduro, an illegitimate ruler who brutalizes his people. Joining us is the true and legitimate president of Venezuela, Juan Guaido. Well, this is just objectively untrue. Like so much of his speech, it's objectively untrue. Even that little shred of credibility that he had with the regime changers a year ago is gone because he's no longer head of the National Assembly. So he has absolutely no legitimate claim to be even an interim president. But here's the thing. The U.S. can't even figure out who won in Iowa. right? Several days ago, yet we know exactly who won in Venezuela a year ago, And it's just comical. And you talk about the evil socialist dictator Maduro. Read the speech. It's one of the most socialist speeches I ever. This could have been given by FDR, I think. Every single turn of the speech is about the federal government's further and deeper involvement into our lives. So sorry, pot kettle black on socialism.
Yeah, and your point about so many things that we'll complain about, supported by both the parties. One, it was very emotional and very sympathetic. I see the person he called out more victimized than a hater of America, and that has to do with the family whose the father and husband went overseas many times. He's believing that he's spreading democracy and protecting freedom and our Constitution. All the propaganda, they probably feel very good about doing it, but then the surprise return to the family, that is really a little bit disingenuous to say the least. But somebody was looking at the applause meters, and that is when the Republicans and the Democrats did the most applause the militarism, and in a way endorsing. You'd have to endorse the foreign policy. Yes, you can separate it to a degree. I mean, I was in the military and I was drafted, but I wasn't responsible for Vietnam, this sort of thing. And so there is a little bit of a separation there, but I think the making of the militarism, and hold it in such high esteem, I think that's dangerous, especially when our goal is more empire building than much else. I don't think that appointing the president of Venezuela is promoting liberty. And it's part of the empire building. And I guess we've been in Central and South America for a long time. Maybe we ought to try something new someday.
Yeah, and the other thing that's unseemly is using U.S. military personnel who are killed or wounded in these ridiculous deployments overseas as props to back up a really idiotic foreign policy decision. And I'm thinking of when he blamed Soleimani for the death of an American soldier overseas by saying that he gave them this IED. This is something that's not true. It hasn't been proven, and Trump's whole rationale for killing Soleimani, that we were an imminent threat, imminent danger, he's going to attack us, that completely fell through. They all admitted it was totally fake. And now he's grabbing American soldiers that were killed and using them as props to justify an illegal assassination. That is unseemly.
And I do challenge philosophically this blending together America first foreign policy and what we have. Because quite frankly, I don't think it's the best thing for the American people. I don't think it's the best thing for our liberties. I don't think that if you understand 9/11, that has been helpful to our liberties. Most of the demands and changes have been tax the American people and take away more liberty, have the Patriot Act passed and spend all this money. So it just doesn't fit the argument that this is America first. I think it's the military-industrial complex that is first.
Yeah.
And what was the statistic we saw today? There's $200 billion of weapons sales every year. But guess what? We're top of the heap. We got 80% of the business, and that's one thing that Trump is not bashful about.
No,
Matter of fact, some of his people who are very, very positive on Trump think this is great. That's why our economy is doing well. We spend more money on all this stuff. But he had a lot of spending in here. When he was passing out goods and services, and this is not going to address. Matter of fact, the last thing the Republicans and the Democrats wanted to hear was really bringing troops home and America's first interest come home. Were they unhappy because there was no cut in spending? No, the cheers went, we're going to increase spending.
Yeah.
But they're getting away with it right now, and the deficit's over $1 trillion. So it'll last a while longer until they run out of paper. Used to be they ran out of paper, but it's running out of trust in the paper or the computers for all the money we print and pass out.
Exactly. And you talk about a lack of real America first. Here's an irony, Dr. Paul, that I noticed in the speech. Here he has one line. talking about Venezuela. Socialism destroys nations. Freedom unifies the soul. That sounds okay, actually. His very next line, literally, to safeguard American liberty, we have invested $2.2 trillion in the U.S. military. That's socialism for the rich. That's socialism for the military-industrial complex. He's damning Maduro for the socialism. In the very next line, he touts our wonderful military socialism, military Keynesianism. Of course, he goes on to talk about more federal government involvement in education. Congress, you better pass these scholarships. We need more money for treating people with Alzheimer's, more federal government money for this. We need paid family leave. Congress, get on the ball, pass it. More money, more socialism. So it really is almost laughable when you think about it.
And I think one of the big problems structurally and philosophically is the fact that the empire that we complain about, influence is one thing, and trading with people and traveling and having friends is one thing, but building an empire, that is quite a bit different. But I think the American people can't see the difference, and they cheer on the empire as if this is American goodness.
Yeah.
We spread our goodness and our prosperity and all these things. But that is where I think is disingenuous. And Trump's program, I can. It's terrible to have to challenge the most important theme of his whole presidency is American first, America first. And I believe in his heart, he probably believes he's taking care of America first. If you take care of military jobs and you spread our militarism, it's always good for America. Well, I just challenge that, and things don't go well. We've mentioned it so many times. That was part of Bush's argument by why we had to go into Iraq. It was to help people and take care of people suffering under Saddam Hussein. And look at what the mess is there. It keeps getting worse. Now. Now he's right now dealing with Iraq, that he just sent in a high military official to try to make sure that they don't throw us out. They don't want us there. They voted 100%. It's time for you guys to leave. Well, maybe if it only were to America's first position, that's a good idea for us. We'd say that's good for America. If people like me who got drafted out of my medical training, it wouldn't happen. Yeah. And of course, we talked the other day about the draft, because if this thing gets out of control, which it always can, they always need more bodies. And I'm hoping, we warned people about the draft. I'm hoping that that's not going to happen. But believe me, they're capable of it because they keep the registration up. Yeah, including the women. Yeah,
and you talk about Iraq and now trying to make sure this new prime minister is doing what he's told. And America first. The U.S. claims that we can't come home because we're a force for good. Well, if really the Iraqis saw the American occupation as a force for good, why would they ask us to leave? Why would the Syrians ask us to go? They've been fighting ISIS for years. If the U.S. was really fighting ISIS as a force for good, why do they want us to leave so much? Why do people not want us to do good for them? It's a good question. The other thing that stuck out to me, Dr. Paul, was his couple of comments on NATO. And it's the usual sort of bravado and bragging on his part. He said, We've getting our allies to pay their fair share now. More of them are paying their fair share. And I was thinking, I remembered a story from a few weeks ago. And yes, it was January 28th, the Daily Mail. They reported that the German army is so short of armored vehicles that the soldiers have to take their own cars to these exercises, and they have to jump out of their cars and pretend they're driving tanks and armored vehicles because they don't have any. So if Germany really feels all this threat from Russia and feels like it needs to pump up and be more part of NATO and more money, and they're sure not showing it from their actions.
Yeah, there's going to be a couple dollars spent on exploring space, a new department in the military. That's going to be very expensive. And I think it's great for exploration of space. I'm fascinated with it. I'm just not fascinated with taking money from the middle class Americans and giving it to rich companies who are going to make a lot of profit. And what are they going to do? I think it was said that we have to be the first one to have a colony on Mars. Why? Why do we have to be? I don't understand that. And there's going to send a lot of people back to the moon. And I think it's great. And there's people with a lot of money. I think that's where they would spend it if we just leave them alone and let them happen. But the other thing that is annoying when I hear about our foreign policy is the Iranian thing.
Yeah.
That drives our whole Middle East policy. We have Iran and claim that our policies have just preserved the peace. They were about ready to start a war with us, but we stopped it. They're surrounded by 150 or 200 nukes, and now what we have to do is we have to keep the ante up because we're continuing to make Russia look like an enemy. So we have to have subs that carry nuclear weapons. Yeah. Oh, they say these are little nuclear weapons.
Nobody
they're
will even
baby
notice.
nukes. And I thought, well, maybe that is better than the big ones. But you know what? It's probably worse because they're more likely to use them. There won't be total destruction of a city at one time, but if hostilities break out, somebody starts dropping these baby nukes on them, it could escalate. So the fact that we need nukes on our submarines and it's patrolling, the world, essentially, they're capable of doing this, is hardly a benefit to Americans. We're not protecting the Russians. The Russians are concerned, but they're reacting to what we do, just like the Iranians react. The Chinese react to us, and they have some very aggressive people. But I just don't see why we have to be in their face. And I keep making the one analogy, and a lot of people say it's a good one, is how would we react if we had somebody doing to us what we do to them? What if the Gulf of Mexico was flowing with Chinese submarines and the Russians were in the Chesapeake Bay?
Yeah.
It's just way blown out of proportion to how we should look at this, and it seems like too much money can be made with war. War propaganda and war profits is a powerful force. And unfortunately, no matter how they spin it on economic matters, it does not raise the standard of living for the middle class because they pay it with paper money and fiat money always diminishes the benefits of the middle class. And even though the numbers are great, there's some people who are still suffering and they're nibbling away. And when the downturn occurs, believe me, somebody's going to have to pay the bills.
Yeah, indeed. Well, one of the problems I think Americans have, and maybe it's because of the excessive propaganda or the duopoly that governs the country, is our inability to look in the mirror and see things as they are rather than as we wish them to be. And I think this is nowhere more evident than Trump's talk about Iran. You started mentioning Iran, and his point on Iran could very, very well and more appropriately be aimed toward the U.S. foreign policy. He said the Iranian regime must abandon its pursuit of nuclear weapons, stop spreading terror, death, and destruction, and start working for the good of its people. And that's pretty good advice. I wish Trump would have taken it himself.
But aren't they the ones who institute the greatest amount of terrorism around the world? That is what is said. But they don't have the statistics to back it up.
No.
But if you really want to look at it and look at the connection of 9/11, lo and behold, you find there are other countries. I think Saudi Arabia had a few things to do with that.
Yeah, exactly. Well, someone posted this. It's not my original idea, but it's a pretty good one. It says, Trump gave a liberal speech, the conservatives cheered, and the liberals booed. So that tells you a lot about the state of American politics today. I will just close with the save the date message, and I hope by the beginning of next week we'll have things completely sewn up so we can give more details. But we're going to do a spring conference in Houston. I've alluded to it before. We've nailed down the date of May 23rd, the weekend before Memorial Day weekend. We're going to do it in Houston. We have a lot of great supporters, Dr. Paul, in Texas and in Houston and around us. We're certainly happy when people come from further away as well. It'll be a nice, fun, small conference. The topic is going to be the war on speech, which we're in the middle of, and we see a lot of it all around us. We're going to have some great speakers, Dr. Paul, and we'll have a great time. So May 23rd, mark your calendars.
Very, very good. And sorting all this out is important because of the politics and the emotions. Because I have to admit, my emotions were against Jerry Nadler and Adam Schiff. I just couldn't adapt it. Even if some conservative libertarians are pointing out, well, yeah, they're really on the right track. And Mitt Romney said they're on the right track. I had no feelings for that. At the same time, I can't get up and down, jump up and down about our foreign policy and the deception that goes on, because I don't believe it's really truly for America first. I think the only thing that is American first is when we truly move toward liberty for the individual, and that we understand what that means. And that means strong endorsement and enforcement of the non-aggression principle. You can't hurt other people. You can't steal from other people. You can't lie to people. And you can't kill other people. And unfortunately, our government does a lot of that. All governments do it. And our governments do it. And when you look at our Secretary of State, who used to be in charge of the CIA, and listen to what he says, and admits he lies. I mean, that is atrocious. How can we say that the CIA should pick the next president of Venezuela? I say they shouldn't be in that business if you care about America first. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.